Well, hello there, domain name people. In this latest segment of our video blog series, we're going to have a conversation with the head of data at Spamhaus, Carel Bitter. Spamhaus is one of the abuse sources that we have curated into our IQ Abuse Manager, and it's among several other feeds that are available to all of our customers and trial users. I conducted a wide-ranging conversation with Carel, who is part of the very fabric of the Spamhaus project. He's been with the organization for over a decade. And most of his time is spent investigating how a bad actor's infrastructure operates. And it's his mission to ensure that internet users are protected from nefarious activity. Carel regularly presents to audiences around the globe, and we are so fortunate to have snagged him away from his busy schedule to speak with us today. So let's get going. Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome. This is the fifth segment of the IQ video blog series. And today I'm thrilled to have Carel Bitter with us. And Carel is the chief data scientist at the Spamhaus project. Hello there, Carel. Hello there.
Hello, hello. Yeah, head of data, but it doesn't really matter. I'm a data guy. Let's make it short to that. The data guy.
Okay, yeah, that's data is what it's all about. I think, especially what we're talking about here today. Hey, how did you get involved, with the Spamhaus project?
Well, I guess it's kind of a fun story. It happened a really long time ago, and this was before the days where spam filters were very common and something that basically everybody had and took care of things. My private email address there was a day where I got more spam than actual email, and it just got out of hand, and the amount of spam just drowned out any other conversations I had. So I started looking into, okay, what can I do about this? And I got involved with all sorts of forums, and this is back in the days of Usenet. And through all those sort of things, I met other people who were dealing with these issues. And at some point, I was asked to help the Spamhaus project. That's the short version.
Can you give me a little bit of an overview, give our audience a little bit of overview of the Spamhaus project's mission, maybe a little bit about your history as well?
Yeah, so the Spamhaus project has been around for in internet terms quite a long time. We started in 1998, which is by now 23 years ago, which is quite long on the internet. And it was started by a group of like-minded people said, you know what, we should really try to see if we can do something about this spam problem. And it started out by highlighting the people, both the people responsible for sending the spam, but also the facilitators, the people who were producing the specific software used for spamming, and any ISPs that were involved in making sure that these people could do what they were doing. This was very much in the early days. There wasn't lots of AUP type things that were just all in its infancy, and so it started out as just a bunch of like-minded people and was formed into a nonprofit, which it still is today. The Spamhaus project is a nonprofit that has as our goal, it is to fight spam and related abuse on the internet. So over time, the spam problem itself obviously morphed quite a bit. It started out with people just sending spam directly, then they moved to open relays, to open proxies, to malware created proxies, botnets. So at some point, just spam itself started to touch really a lot of other different subjects like malware, botnets, and things like that. Phishing came along, and one of the things that makes us sort of unique in this place is that we publish data that people can use to block spam that they get, and we give that away for free. There's I have to say there's a sort of acceptable use policy attached to that, so that you can't abuse the thing that the service that we provide. But basically, we still to this day, and I hope forever, we provide data that people can use to protect themselves against spam in its many shapes and forms. And that same data, or sometimes derivatives thereof, or subsets thereof, we also provide to ISPs, to networks, to registries, registrars, certs, to be able to help them to remediate any problems that they might find. So that is what we do.
Yeah, and I think that translates into the various lists that you provide. That I'm aware of course, the different block lists. And some of our viewers watching this know a lot about those, but there are others that might need a primer. Could you briefly define the Spamhaus block list, or essentially, what is that list, or the domain block list in particular, and how that's used?
Yeah, so we generally provide the majority of our data either concerns about IP addresses, so it's reputation or classification of IP addresses, or domain names. And since we're talking mostly about domain names here, I'll go a little bit deeper into that. We have a domain reputation data set, and which is what we basically try to do is we try to assess the reputation of every domain we can find. So we're not just looking at bad domains, we're also looking at good domains and how they weigh each other out and how they influence each other. What we publish to the public for free, the domain block list, is a list of domain names that we think you should be extra careful with if you see them in email. It started out as very much as an email-centric product.
Right.
But with that list, we have subsets of the list that are more focused towards, for example, registry, registrar remediation. The fact that you put something on a block list and say, okay, if you see this in email, you probably don't want to accept that email. That doesn't mean automatically that the registry, registrar might take that same domain name and say, okay, we're gonna cancel it or put it on server hold or client hold, anything like that. So right. there is a subset of the data which is for registries, registrars. There are subsets of data that only deal with legitimate domain names that might have been compromised. There are subsets that deal with malware. There's subsets that deal with command and control and phishing. So, but it all comes out of the same big engine, which we usually refer to as the DBL engine. And and the DBL is just the most visible part of that. But in the end, it's a domain reputation data set. And the fact that you're on the DBL doesn't mean, as a domain owner, that you are, that we think you're a spammer. It just means that we think that the reputation of your domain name is poor or possibly even bad. Mm-hmm. And so but the real power in that is in the different use cases that you can have for the data, that depending on what you use it for, there's really a lot you can do with it.
Yeah, so thanks for explaining a little bit about that. I think as it relates to like a domain name registry operator or even registrars, when you're looking at like a lot of names, obviously at scale, perhaps, can you share a little bit about how that list is compiled, or how you calculate it?
Right. Yeah. So what I always start with saying, we try to get our hands on every domain name that exists. First you need to know that the domain name exists before you can calculate any reputation on it. So we're very greedy about getting domain names. We take zone files, but we also take email traffic. We take DNS traffic. We look at anywhere where we can get domain names. The moment we have a domain name in our hands, to say, hey, we've never seen this before, we can start our process of assessing the reputation, figuring out, is this one good or bad, or maybe we don't know yet, or maybe it's somewhere in the gray area. And this is a process that uses hundreds of different things that we look at, and that all have an assigned score. And basically all these things together, the score either goes towards good or goes towards bad. And you add all these little things together, and you end up at a score for the domain. Obviously, this is not a static thing. We reassess domains quite regularly, depending on a whole lot of factors. So the score is always something that in the way we see it, this is if you compare it to people you meet, if you meet somebody just for the first time, you're probably not just going to give them the keys to your house, right? But yeah. So, but once you get to know people better, you're going to trust them more. And this is the same with domain names that we become aware of. And domain names that are new usually have, that just because they're new, you don't always know what the purpose is, what the context is, and that's something that's important in assessing domain reputations. You need to keep doing this over a longer time, and you will see a domain either drift towards good or drift towards bad. Things can go, and just like the analogy of meeting a person, things can go too bad really quickly, and if they do, it takes a longer time to go back to good. If somebody robs you, steals your wallet, pretty bad reputation for this person, and before you trust them again, that's going to take some time. So this is the same with domain names.
Interesting. Yeah, I think when the folks that are using our tools, for example, some of them like to look at domains that have been registered in the 5-day ad grace period that might be being used for credit card fraud, phishing attacks, and so forth. And then others are really surprised to find that domains that have a long history that have been in the DNS for more than a decade, perhaps even 2 decades, actually have malware or command and control established on that domain, and the domain registrant or may not even be aware.
Yeah, and so I mean, the domain industry and the domain ecosystem is as pretty dynamic, and we've had, if you look over the past 5-6 years, we've got all the new GTLDs, which is I think changed the landscape quite a bit. But there's also as some bad people, some miscreants figure out that new domains have inherently far less trust than old ones. People try to go out and get old ones to say, okay, maybe I can sort of circumvent that mistrust of new domains. So they try to get old domains and then do bad things with them. And unfortunately, it is, at least from a security perspective, it is pretty easy to get your hands on a secondhand domain name and still have it carry its original registration date that might be back in 2010, 2005. So you get all these years of being good. You sort of get as an extra present. And that's something that would be great if that could be handled a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think even if you're you think that the bad actors out there would try to create fake identities, but it seems like it's a lot easier to steal someone's identity than to create a fake one, perhaps.
There are so many leaks around these days, so it's so easy to get tons of PII and use that to get either to buy new domain names and say, okay, instead of where people used to put completely fake things in there. I mean, a lot of registries these days do some form of checking against what people fill in as domain owners, and so the days of using completely made up things are, I wouldn't say behind us, but there's a little bit more scrutiny these days. But it's really easy to get either really good looking fake data or just why bother with fake data if you can get real data? So
that kind of actually leads to my next question, and that is like you were saying earlier, a domain, just because it is reported on your list does not necessarily mean inherently that it is bad, but that it could be bad, or the reputation is poor. But the registrant, through the registry or the registry itself or the domain registrar, is able to show that this domain name actually is okay. It's cool. There's actually nothing wrong with it. How do they remove that from your list?
So the way we operate the list is that basically anyone can come in through the website and do a self removal, and only in like a select subset of the cases, they instead of the self removal being immediately active, like within a minute, they might be required to create a ticket where the removal request is subject to human review. But even that, I mean, that usually gets handled pretty quickly. So it's really it's as easy as it is to get on the list. In certain cases, it's also very easy to get off the list. What we don't want, obviously, is to have the list. I mean, it's never possible to have 0 false positives and 0 false negatives. But
Right.
What we want to do is that when they happen, we want to make sure that people have a very quick and easy way to remediate it themselves. And at the same time, we hope to give them some useful information saying, look, this is this is what best practices are around this sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's especially in cases where people create a ticket, we have the opportunity to communicate with the domain owner and say, look, this is what we think you should do different. I mean, obviously, we're not the police; we can't force anyone. But there's a lot of internet security has gotten very complicated and very hard, and there are many people who do things and they're maybe not aware of what some of the best practices are. So there's really a teaching moment there that we can use to say, look, if you would have done this differently, or if you would pay more attention to that, then you will not have the kind of problems that you run into.
Yeah, that's what we try to advise clients about is best practices in managing abuse and how to prevent it from happening perhaps in the first place. There is somewhat of an ongoing discussion about maybe a more systematic feedback loop on takedown processes. In other words, to provide,
Right.
in other words, if a registry operator says, we just took down, 5,000 names that were reported on your list, and we've taken them down immediately. And there seems to be some discussion, at least from what I'm hearing, that it would be really nice to have some sort of an instant feedback or real-time feedback loop where the Spamhaus project would be alerted that these domains are now placed on server hold.
Happy to accommodate that. Usually I mean, it would be great if we can all agree on how to do that, because there are, just in .com, there are maybe like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 registrars. I'm not exactly sure. And a lot of people want to do things their own way. So if we can agree on having some sort of shared standard, it's easy. But we're pretty flexible, and people who want to work with us, like I said, we're always happy to work with registries and registrars to do this.
I'll ask you this question, because we occasionally get questions from various customers who state that they're very serious with domain name abuse, but they're puzzled about why their particular TLD or registrar gets on your top 10, bad list.
Right.
How do they get off that list? I mean, and that's kind of we advise them on things they should be doing on how they should get off the list. But I'm interested to hear, your point of view.
So what we see is that often when this happens, there are just a handful of bad operators who manage to buy a fairly big chunk of domains. And sometimes it's hundreds, sometimes it's over 1,000, sometimes it's even more. And they just, they come in out of the blue. So I think the important thing to remember in this context is that for a lot of people who do bad things with domain names, either being spam or SEO fraud, or basically anything where you need a lot of domain names for.
Yeah,
they don't really care what the domain name looks like, and they also usually don't really care what TLD it is. They are going to buy a name. They are going to know the name gets burned, and so they are in need of a continuous supply of fresh domain names, because otherwise they can't get past filters, either being email filters or maybe Google filters out search results. It doesn't really matter what the kind of abuse is. They know the domain names get burned, and as a result, they care more about they care a lot about pricing. If you have to buy a lot of domain names, you know, if you can pay half of what you normally pay, you're going to get a lot of extra domain names, and you can do, as a result, you can probably do more abuse. So you often see that these things follow promotions. If a TLD suddenly starts promoting the domain names in that TLD, saying, "Hey, we have this promotion running for the next month or 2 months or whatever," and you get, you know, the domains at steep discount. That's often when the abuse comes in, because again, the bad operators, the miscreants, don't really care so much about the TLD. Usually, it's not always the case, but often they don't, and they will just buy in volume, and they will come in at once, and they will buy a lot of domains at once. And if they have a fairly successful campaign with this, where they can the domains don't get taken down immediately, they'll probably buy more. Say, hey, this one works. This you know, the response time is either, you know, doesn't exist, or it's long enough for us to get out of it what we want. But in the end, they will treat the domain names as throwaway resources. You know, they use it, right. It gets burned, and they forget about it. Obviously, these don't get renewed, right? This is there's an enormous churn in some of these names, and so if you have,
I'm sorry.
So, yeah. No, if you have these some of these TLDs don't you get this really big influx of bad domains, and
right.
Because we calculate the scores not against the entire zone file volume, because we often don't know it. You know, the GTLDs you can get to some, but CCTLDs, most CCTLDs you just have to guess how big the zone is. So we come up with this formula where we look at how much domains we see in DNS traffic. So, and this sort of takes care of some TLDs have an enormous amount of parked domains, which exist, but they don't really do anything, and they're not getting used. So this is sort of a way to deal with that and say, okay, look, how much of the domain names that are in a certain TLD are being actively used by, you know, people on the internet, doesn't really matter for what, they just see them in DNS traffic, and how much of those we think are bad. And so, yeah, if suddenly there's this enormous influx of bad domains, people buying domains by the hundreds, by the thousands, and they start abusing things, yeah, then suddenly you can go into the top 10 pretty quickly. And but you know, if they go away, if you cancel the domain, you'll also automatically drop out of the top 10. And you know, over time, it is actually, I think this is a really interesting thing, is that we've had a lot of registries and registrars reach out when they get in there, saying, hey, you know, we find ourselves in there. Is there any information you can provide? And so we can give them the list of the domains we think are bad. And usually that ends up in, you know, a long time working relationship where we send people things that we think are bad, either directly, right, or, you know, through your product, for example, and they deal with it. And that's the great thing. I mean, that sort of keeps the TLDs clean. And in the end, that also the best way of preventing abuse is to be proactive about it. You know, the bad people know that okay, if they go to a certain TLD and sometimes the domains get blocked before they get used. And they say, okay, this is, you know, money wasted. We're not going to go there again. And that's in the end, that's great.
Yeah, and I think that kind of explains maybe the peaks and valleys, perhaps, of why someone might suddenly appear on the list and then disappear, and then maybe reappear on the list because of these blocked names. Do you have any data that you can maybe talk about, or maybe that you've analyzed, that might show any particular trends on low-priced domains, say, versus .com? I mean, .com is arguably the largest TLD out there. It's been around, you know, for a long time. It has the top branding, I guess you could say, but it's not exactly, you know, low price. There are registrars sometimes that may offer, if they're able to, you know, super duper low price for the first year, similar to what you might find on some new GTLDs. But like, do you find that the types of abuse that are being used, that's being propagated perhaps in the .com zone, differs from what you've seen in the new GTLDs, for example, or CCTLDs?
No, so CCTLDs are a little bit different, because some of the CCTLDs are very much, I would call it locked down. Like you need to have your registrant info be in the country that the CCTLD belongs to,
Right.
which is a great way of limiting abuse, by the way. Obviously, GTLDs can't really do that. They're usually open to anyone who wants to get one. .com, I mean, it's been around forever. Everybody has it. They have probably by total number of domains the largest number of bad domains, but that's not weird because they are also by far the largest TLD. So, but again, if you look at it from total registrations or total active, the numbers for .com look pretty good. So is it different in new GTLDs? Yes, sometimes it is. It differs per TLD, and it's really a come and go thing. I mean, a couple of years ago, there were a couple of TLDs that were managed by a registrar that doesn't really exist anymore right now, and they had enormous numbers of abuse, which all turned out to come from one registrar that was basically, I guess, almost the exclusive reseller of those TLDs. Right. And who had a very aggressive pricing strategy, and who even offered tools to easily create like large batches of domain names. So if you don't know the name yourself, they had this tool on the website. They would just generate strings and add their TLD to it, and there was this mass buy button, your bulk registration button, so you could buy 500 domains in one go, right, which is great for people who see them as a throwaway asset, as something that they burn through. Yeah. So I mean, so from our perspective, there's always been a strong correlation between abuse and price. The cheap domains will get more abusive registrations. You will see that when an existing TLD that is otherwise fine, when they run a promotion, they'll probably get more abusive registrations coming in. However, if you want hard data, for us, it's really hard to do that because it's not, I mean, we can measure the abuse. What we can't really measure ourselves easily is the price, because there are so many different registrars out there. There are so many different websites out there, and getting the price and monitoring that automatically is hard. That's just really tough to do. There's been plenty. I think there's even academic research out there that shows a strong correlation between abuse and price. And just from my experience of doing this over 10 years, I can say that the moment the price dives, the abuse goes up.
We are asked a lot about providing evidence with our reports. Mm-hmm. That's becoming a little bit more of a topic, I think, within the domain industry. Is it possible to get email headers or other evidence with the reports?
Not always. So so, for example, there's a lot of domain abuse that doesn't involve around email. So we have quite good email visibility, but we have far less visibility into other types of abuse, like trademark violations and stuff. Mm-hmm. For example, phishing. There's a lot of phishing that happens outside of email. And we find the domains, and they're very clearly phishing domains. I mean, they have the brand name in there. They have strings in it like login or account creation or anything like that, password reset. There's SSL certificates. If you go to the websites, if you find them, it's very clearly it's phishing. But apparently the messaging is not happening over email. It's happening in WhatsApp or in text messages or on social media or I don't know where. So often we don't have the actual message that sort of carries the domain name, but we by looking at other things, we say, we're pretty sure that this is bad. Mm-hmm. It's actually, I was in a workshop last week where this came up as well, and I mean I get that it's something that people are looking for, and I'm thinking about ways how we can share more evidence, but in the end, what we run is a reputation system, and it calculates reputation based on factors that we think are important. And sometimes we will have we will come to the conclusion that the domain is bad before it gets used for whatever badness it gets used for. Which is the brilliant part of domain reputation. Basically, think about it. You have a domain that gets used for something bad. But before you can use it, you need to buy it, right? You need to register it. It needs to be live.
Right.
And so you have this window of opportunity between registration and use for badness. And sometimes that's a day, sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's a year. But this is your window of opportunity to figure out that this domain name is bad before it gets used for whatever badness it is. Because if you're able to do that, and you can have it in your reputation data set, block list, whatever, you can protect your users from the very first spam that's being sent or the very first phishing email that's being sent, because you've already figured out that this domain they bought is bad before they've used it.
Yeah,
And
that makes a lot of sense. I think that maybe explains perhaps to viewers why a domain is on the block list that is not resolving and has no MX records. You know, that it's a kind of a prediction or a reputation score that from what you've seen in the past indicates that, you know, there's a likelihood that this is going to be bad.
There's a lot of stuff that goes on beyond email that involves domain names as well, and domain names as a pivotal part of whatever the abuse is. There's a lot of phishing that's being done that doesn't happen over email, but if you look at the domain names, it's very clear that it's phishing.
Yeah, that makes sense. What new attack vectors are you observing today or these days? I think I've read something about phishing rod attacks as opposed to phishing attacks and so forth. Can you explain a little bit about that?
So I mean, stuff is always evolving, and people always come up with new things. Something that I've been just looking into this week was there's a malware campaign that is very cleverly using old domains to make it look legit, and they're even before they send the actual the bad emails, the dangerous emails, because you know, the stuff they send in the end leads to malware getting installed on your computer. They're even doing like little warm-up campaigns to warm the IPs and the domains up, and with sort of innocent-looking messages, very carefully targeted to make sure that their message gets through as good as they can. It's sort of it's sad to see, and on one hand, or the other hand, it's fascinating to see that you know, the people on the other side, the miscreants, the bad people, are very knowledgeable, and they have a great deal of interest in how, you know, filtering systems, reputation systems work, and they are not stupid. And obviously, there's a lot of money to be made, and as long as that's the case, they are going to be very motivated to come up with new ways to create abuse.
Yeah. The threats are always evolving, and staying on top of it, I think, is a full-time job. Well, Carel, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. It's been a real thrill to speak with you, and I think I've learned a lot. Hopefully our audience has learned a lot. But thank you very much for your comments today.
No problem.